Welcome back. So, how did you do? Were you able to complete the series section? Let's take a look at my solution. I decided to create an entity type focused repository for the series entity type. So, the first thing that I did was add a series repository class to the class library's data folder. I inherited from the base repository class and specified the series entity type for the entity type generic parameter. Then, I added a constructor in order to get a reference to the database context and implemented the get and getList abstract methods. In the get method, I called the dbset asQueryable method to get a reference to an iQueryable object in order to eagerly load the comic book's navigation collection property if the include related entities parameter is set to true. And in the getList method, I simply called the toList method on the context's series dbset property, ordering the list by the series title property. I also added a series has title method that uses the any operator to check if there's a series with a different ID but the same title. Once I had the repository completed, I turned my attention to the series controller class. I started by updating the controller to inherit from our base controller class. Remember, inheriting from our custom controller base class gives the descendant controller class access to our database context class. Then, I added a private field for the series repository and added a constructor to initialize the private field. In the index action method, I replaced the instantiation of the list collection with a call to the repository's getList method. In the detail action method, I replaced the instantiation of the series entity class with a call to the repository's get method. In the add post action method, I added a call to the repository's add method to add the series to the database. In the edit get action method, I added another call to the repository's get method, this time setting the include related entities parameter to false. Setting the include related entities parameter to false wasn't absolutely necessary to do. If you didn't, you probably noticed that the page rendered just fine. It's just a small optimization to not load the series as comic books, since the edit series page doesn't display them. In the edit post action method, I added a call to the repository's update method to persist to the database any changes made to the series entity. In the delete get action method, I added another call to the repository's get method. And in the delete post action method, I added a call to the repository's delete method to delete the series entity from the database. And lastly, I updated the validate series method with a call to the repository's series has title method. While that completed all of the necessary changes to implement the series section, I decided to do a bit of cleanup work in the repository class. The getSeriesList method had the same implementation as the entity type focused repository's getList method, so I removed that method. Removing the getSeriesList method from the repository class introduced an error in the comic book's base viewModel class, as the init method contained a call to that method. To resolve the error, I added another parameter for the series repository. And replaced the call to the getSeriesList method with a call to the series repository getList method. Changing the signature of the virtual init method then caused an error in the comic book's addViewModel class. I resolved that error by adding a series repository parameter so its signature matched the init method in the base class. And I updated the call to the base class's init method by passing in the series repository parameter. Changing the signature of the viewModel's init method broke every call to that method in the comic book's controller class, a total of 4 errors. To resolve those errors, I needed an instance of the series repository class that I could pass to each init method call. So I added a private field for the series repository and updated the constructor to initialize that private field to an instance of the series repository class. Then, I updated each call to the init method to pass in the underscore series repository private field. It's sometimes surprising how such a simple change, like removing one method from a repository, can result in so many cascading changes. Once I had completed all of my changes, I ran and tested the app. Don't worry if you weren't able to complete all of the tasks. Attempting to complete a task, regardless of whether or not you were successful, is an important part of the learning process. Failing at a task is not a measure of your abilities. It's simply a signal that you've got something else to learn. Also, you may have done things differently than how I did, and that's okay. There's almost always more than one way to implement a feature or to solve a problem. Next up, finishing the artist section of the web app.